boundaries between the real and the virtual are becoming thinner every year. Today, virtual reality is no longer science fiction from novels, but a tangible technology penetrating all spheres of our lives. From simple entertainment to complex professional simulators, from social platforms to therapeutic programs, VR is changing how we perceive the world and ourselves. The technological progress in this field over the last decade is astonishing. Display resolution has increased tenfold, motion tracking has become almost flawless, and haptic technologies allow us to feel virtual objects. But behind this rapid development lies a fundamental question. What happens to our identity when we regularly immerse ourselves in worlds that exist only in digital space? When our consciousness begins to perceive virtual experiences as real, where is the boundary between who we are and who we become in virtual space? Entering virtual reality, we don't just put on a headset, we create a new version of ourselves. The avatar becomes our digital reflection, a projection of desires, fantasies, and hidden aspects of our personality. Research shows that over 70% of VR users choose avatars significantly different from their real appearance. This is not just a game. It's a psychological process that scientists call extended identity. When a person regularly embodies themselves in a virtual body, an amazing phenomenon occurs known as the Proteus effect, named after the ancient Greek sea deity capable of changing shape. We begin to adopt the characteristics of our digital embodiment. Users with tall, athletic avatars demonstrate greater confidence, both in virtual space and after returning to reality. But beneath this lies a fine line of dissociative processes. Professor Jeremy Bailenson of Stanford University, in his experiments, found that after 20 minutes of immersion in VR using someone else's avatar, participants began to describe themselves with the characteristics of that virtual body. This is not just a temporary state. It is the beginning of the blurring of self-identification boundaries. The choice of avatars among teenagers is particularly indicative. At an age when identity formation is at a critical stage, virtual embodiments become a testing ground for experimenting with self-perception. They try on different images, gender roles, social masks, everything that might be inaccessible or taboo in reality. The virtual body offers unprecedented freedom, but also creates the risk of personality fragmentation. When a person regularly switches between different avatars, each with its own set of characteristics and social roles, the phenomenon of multiple selves arises. The psyche begins to separate experience into real and virtual, but neural connections are formed identically in both cases. Immersion in virtual reality triggers complex neuropsychological processes that science is only just beginning to study. The key here is the phenomenon of presence, a state where the brain ceases to distinguish virtual stimuli from real ones. This is not just an illusion. It's a retuning of the brain's sensory systems. When we put on a VR headset, our visual and auditory analyzers receive signals indistinguishable from real ones. The brain, evolutionarily unprepared for such deception, reacts by activating the same neural circuits as when processing real events. Studies using functional magnetic resonance imaging show, upon seeing a virtual abyss, the same brain areas are activated as in the face of real danger. Especially telling is the body transfer effect, when a person begins to perceive a virtual body as their own. Experiments by Mel Slater from the University of Barcelona demonstrate 20 minutes of synchronized movements are enough to create the sensation of owning someone else's body. At the same time, the connection with the real body schema temporarily weakens, the first step towards the blurring of identity. Prolonged stay in VR creates the effect of reality uncertainty. The brain, receiving conflicting signals about the body's location, begins to form a dual model of reality. Neuroplasticity, evolution's great gift, becomes an Achilles heel in the world of digital illusions. Neural connections rewire, adapting to the virtual experience. Of particular danger is the so-called residual virtuality, when, after exiting VR, a person continues to perceive the real world through the prism of virtual experience. Users report attempts to interact with real objects as if they were virtual. For example, trying to teleport to another room or scale objects with gestures. Virtual reality doesn't just change how we see the world. It transforms the very way humans interact. Social communication, for millennia based on physical presence, now occurs in a space where bodies are replaced by digital projections, and nonverbal cues are limited by the technological capabilities of devices. Completely new communicative patterns are forming in virtual worlds. Research by sociologists from MIT shows users of VR platforms are 30% more likely to reveal personal information to strangers than in real-life communication. This phenomenon, dubbed virtual candor, is explained by the sense of security provided by avatar anonymity. Simultaneously, a profound transformation in the perception of social norms is occurring. In virtual spaces, their own ethical codes are formed, often radically different from those accepted in the physical world. Users who regularly violate social boundaries in VR begin to demonstrate a blurred understanding of personal space in real-life interactions as well. Especially alarming is the cognitive dissonance that arises from constant switching between virtual and real socialization. Psychologists at Stanford University describe the double standards effect, where a person unconsciously applies different social rules depending on the environment. This leads to a fragmentation of social intelligence and hinders the formation of holistic interpersonal relationships. In virtual environments, we observe a paradoxical combination of hypersocialization and profound loneliness. A person can simultaneously interact with hundreds of avatars and yet experience a sharp sense of isolation. Studies show that prolonged communication exclusively through VR platforms reduces the ability to read nonverbal cues in real life by 18% after just 3 months of regular use. Behind abstract concepts always lie real human stories. Mark, a 29-year-old programmer, spent over 5,000 hours in a social VR platform over 2 years. His case was documented by University of California researchers as one of the first clinical examples of virtual dissociation. Mark began to confuse memories from real life with events that occurred in the virtual world. "I remember my friend and I climbing to the top of a mountain from which there was a stunning view of the ocean," he told the psychologist. "But then I realized I had never been on that mountain physically. It was my avatar's experience." Specialists call this blending of memories mnemonic superimposition, a phenomenon where the brain does not distinguish the source of emotionally significant memories. Mark developed anxiety and social isolation when the real world began to seem less authentic than the virtual one. His therapy took over a year, including a complete refusal of VR for the first 3 months. The story of Sophia, a 17-year-old schoolgirl, illustrates another aspect of the problem. She created a character with a different gender identity in a VR game. After 8 months of daily immersion, Sophia began to experience what psychologists called cross-reality dysphoria, a deep discomfort from the mismatch between virtual and physical identity. "When I look in the mirror, I don't see my true self," she explained. Particularly alarming was the case of Alexei, a 34-year-old architect who used professional VR tools. He began to show symptoms of spatial disorientation, attempts to manipulate real objects as if they were virtual. Colleagues noticed him trying to undo an action in reality with gestures from a VR interface or move physical objects without touching them. Psychiatrists at the Massachusetts clinic described Alexei's condition as a technologically induced dissociative disorder. Recovery took 6 months of intensive therapy, including rehabilitation exercises for perceiving the physical world. Our brain is an amazing tool for adaptation. Millions of years of evolution have created an organ capable of adapting to a wide variety of environmental conditions. But what happens when this environment is completely artificial? Virtual reality becomes a real test for our neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire its neural connections in response to new experiences. When we immerse ourselves in VR, our brain receives sensory signals that are practically indistinguishable from real ones. The visual cortex processes virtual images in the same way as real objects. At the same time, an interesting phenomenon occurs. Areas of the brain responsible for bodily self-awareness, the parietal lobe and the insular cortex, begin to perceive the virtual body as part of our own. Research by Thomas Metzinger from the University of Mainz shows that after 30 minutes in virtual reality, activity in the brain area responsible for the body schema changes by 28%. The brain literally rewrites the body map, including virtual limbs and an avatar in it. Even more surprising are the changes in spatial perception. The hippocampus, the brain area responsible for spatial navigation, forms so-called place cells. These neurons are activated when we are at a specific point in space. Studies on rats have shown that with regular movement between virtual and real environments, the hippocampus creates separate neural maps for each world. A similar process occurs in humans. The brain builds parallel spatial models. Time in virtual reality is also perceived differently. The cerebellar cortex and basal ganglia, responsible for the body's internal clock, show altered activity. VR users regularly report the phenomenon of time distortion, when 3 hours in the virtual world feel like 1 hour of real time. Most alarming is the formation of new neural connections in response to virtual experiences. According to Hebb's principle, neurons that fire together wire together. The brain does not distinguish the source of stimulation. Emotionally significant experiences in virtual reality form neural connections that are just as strong as real events. This explains why memories of virtual events can be just as vivid as those of real ones. Plunging into the depths of virtual reality, the human psyche faces unprecedented challenges. Our consciousness, evolutionarily unprepared for existence between worlds, begins to exhibit symptoms of serious disorders. Depersonalization becomes the first alarming sign. A person loses the sense of their own reality, perceiving themselves as if an outside observer. "I look at my hands and can't believe they're mine," is how patients at digital detox clinics describe this state. Derealization is the next stage of immersion into the abyss of a fragmented consciousness. The real world begins to seem blurry, unreal, like a backdrop against a vibrant virtuality. One of Dr. Maria Kowalski's patients described it thus: "Touching a wall in my apartment, I instinctively expect my hand to pass through it, as it does in some VR programs." Of particular danger are dissociative disorders, states in which a rupture occurs between perception, consciousness, and identity. The psyche, attempting to cope with the duality of existence, begins to split experience into fragments. Studies show that for people who spend more than 6 hours daily in VR for 3 months, the risk of developing dissociative symptoms increases 4-fold. Our brain possesses astonishing adaptive mechanisms, but this plasticity has its limits. The psyche attempts to integrate virtual experience through so-called reality bridges, cognitive links between the virtual and physical worlds. However, under excessive load, these bridges begin to crumble. When the boundary between realities blurs, the phenomenon of reality flashbacks arises. A person suddenly perceives the physical world through the prism of virtual experience, feeling confusion and anxiety. Psychiatrists describe cases where patients, in moments of stress, tried to use virtual control tools to reboot an unpleasant situation or exit the menu of a conversation. With the development of virtual reality, a natural question arises: who is responsible for the psychological consequences of immersion in digital worlds? Developers, creating increasingly realistic environments, have found themselves at the forefront of an ethical dilemma that has no historical precedents. When immersive technologies released its social VR platform, no one anticipated users would spend 12 hours a day in it. Lead designer David Chen admitted in an interview, "We optimized the system for maximum immersion, but we didn't consider the long-term psychological effects. Now I feel a personal responsibility for every case of disorientation after exiting our environment." Regulatory bodies worldwide are only beginning to grasp the scale of the problem. In South Korea, after a series of incidents involving teenagers losing touch with reality, the world's first Digital Safety Act was passed, requiring VR equipment manufacturers to integrate forced exit systems after 4 hours of continuous use. The European Union is developing an ethical code for virtual reality, which for the first time introduces the concept of psychological safety of the digital environment. The document proposes mandatory labeling of VR content not only by age categories, but also by the degree of immersive impact. However, regulation alone is not enough. Fundamental ethical standards within the industry itself are necessary. A group of leading developers formed the Alliance for Responsible Virtuality, proposing design principles that minimize the risks of identity blurring. We must create not only captivating, but also safe virtual worlds, says neuropsychologist Elena Markova, who consults major technology companies. This means implementing visual reminders of the virtual nature of the environment, periodic breaks, and systems for monitoring the user's psychological state. Responsibility lies not only with developers, but also with educational institutions, which must foster a culture of conscious technology use. In Japanese schools, digital literacy programs are already being implemented, teaching children to recognize signs of excessive immersion in virtual worlds. Virtual reality is not just a technology, but also a zone of personal responsibility. In a world where digital and physical spaces are increasingly intertwined, we need concrete strategies to maintain our integrity. Just as we learn body hygiene, it's time to master the hygiene of our digital presence. The first principle of conscious VR use is temporal boundaries. Researchers at Stanford's Virtual Interactions Lab recommend the 50-minute rule. After this period of continuous immersion, a break of at least 10 minutes in the real world is necessary. During this pause, it's important to perform simple grounding exercises, touching physical objects, focusing on breathing, observing the surrounding space. Psychologist Mikhail Levin proposes the reality anchor method, a special ritual for transitioning between worlds. After taking off the headset, touch 5 different textures, name 3 sounds you hear aloud, and drink a glass of water. This sequence helps the brain retune to physical reality, he explains. Equally important is the principle of conscious identity separation. Experts recommend maintaining a certain distance between oneself and one's avatar. Speak about your virtual embodiment in the third person, advises neuropsychologist Anna Chernikova. Not I did, but my avatar did. This small linguistic habit creates the necessary psychological barrier. For families with children, strategies for co-exploring virtual spaces are particularly relevant. The Digital Parenting Program offers a model of accompanied immersion. Parents regularly participate in virtual worlds with their children, discuss what they see, and help distinguish between fantasy and reality. Educational institutions are also beginning to implement new generation digital literacy programs. Schools in Finland already have a virtual well-being course, where teenagers learn to recognize signs of excessive immersion and practice techniques for conscious switching between realities. The corporate sector is also adapting to new challenges. Companies using VR for employee training are implementing soft exit protocols, special transitional spaces between intense simulations and returning to work tasks. The future of healthy interaction with virtual reality lies not in restrictions, but in awareness. Technology itself is neutral. Everything depends on how we use it. Virtual worlds can expand our experience, not replace it. Enrich identity, not blur it. The key to this balance is in our hands. Standing on the threshold of a new technological era, we observe how virtual reality is rapidly evolving from simple entertainment systems into a full-fledged alternative environment of existence. Analysts predict that by 2030, over a third of humanity will spend at least 4 hours daily in immersive virtual spaces. This is not just statistics, it's a fundamental shift in human experience, changing the very concept of identity. The next decade will bring technologies that blur the boundaries of realities beyond recognition. Neurointerfaces, reading and transmitting signals directly to the brain, will create sensations indistinguishable from real ones. Holographic projections will fill physical space, blending worlds without the need to wear cumbersome helmets. Haptic suits will allow feeling touch, temperature, and even pain in virtual environments. In this new landscape, human identity becomes fluid, multi-layered. Princeton University sociologists describe the formation of a networked self, a personality existing simultaneously in multiple realities, with different sets of characteristics, capabilities, and limitations. We are witnessing the birth of a generation for whom switching between physical and virtual existence will become as natural as breathing. The cultural and social transformations caused by this shift will be colossal. Traditional concepts of geography, nationality, even gender may lose their accustomed meaning. New forms of social organization will emerge, based not on physical proximity, but on shared interests in virtual worlds. We already see the beginnings of this in metaverses, where communities with their own economies, art, and even governance systems are forming. At the same time, we face a real threat of social fragmentation. When virtual worlds become more attractive than physical reality, there is a risk of mass escapism. Japan is already confronting the phenomenon of digital age hikikomori, people who have completely replaced real social contacts with virtual ones. The future is not predetermined. We can guide the evolution of virtual reality towards expanding human capabilities, rather than escaping from reality. The key to this will be a balanced approach, where technology serves as a complement to real experience, not its replacement. Virtual reality can become a powerful tool for developing empathy, literally allowing one to live through another person's experience. It can overcome physical limitations, providing new opportunities for people with disabilities. It can preserve and transmit cultural heritage with unprecedented accuracy. Our task is to learn to live in this new world of multiple realities while preserving personal integrity. We must develop a culture of conscious presence, where individuals themselves define the boundaries of their virtual experience, rather than becoming passive consumers of digital illusions. Technology must serve humanity, not humanity serve technology.